Okay. Does it seem like we're live?
Yes, we are live.
Okay, I'll just start talking. So, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining the second installment of our People Analytics Unplugged webinar series. So, today we're going to be talking about navigating the changing landscape of people analytics. It's a crazy world out there. And so we have been talking kind of amongst ourselves, among colleagues, about the changes in our field, the new technologies, the shifts we've seen as a result of layoffs. And then we've also done a study. And so we wanted to share some of the preliminary findings from that study and have a conversation. So this is really, a conversational environment. So we welcome you to leave comments, ask questions, really become part of the conversation as well so we can all collectively, hear how it's going for our people analytics and employee experience colleagues. So I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rachel Hill. I have my background in IO psychology, and most recently, I was working at VMware in the employee listening and employee experience space, as well as people analytics. I was helping leaders kind of drive decisions around future of work, DEI, employee recognition, um, talent acquisition. So that was where I've been most recently. VMware was recently acquired by Broadcom, and as a result, there were a lot of layoffs in the HR area. So I'm currently on the job market. So it's very appropriate for this conversation. Okay, I'm gonna hop on over to Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Stephanie Murphy. Super excited to co host this series with Rachel on People Analytics Unplugged. We really just wanted to do a couple of things for free for the community, just to learn a little bit about different spaces in people analytics. And so this one we're focusing on kind of navigating the landscape, like Rachel mentioned. So super excited to hop in. I currently am founder and principal consultant for MCS Consulting. Previously worked at Dell Technologies. Also have my PhD and background in IO psychology, and super excited for us to be joined with Khalifa Oliver, the Khalifa Oliver. I will turn it over to her for introductions.
Don't do that. I'm here because Stephanie asked me, and I never tell Stephanie no. So there's that. I am really excited to be here. This is also a topic that is near and dear to my heart, both people analytics, the layoff landscape as well. So my background also is in IO psychology and in people analytics. I have worked at Walmart, Wells Fargo. I'm the founder and managing director of Khalifa K. Oliver Experience Coaching. I do executive advice, and I'm heavily focused on how to people center design work to build better employee experiences, and how do you bring data in to make better executive decisions related to people. So, super excited to have this conversation.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Khalifa. So I think we thought we would just start the conversation by talking about change and how we've seen the people analytics field change over, a long period of time over the past 5 to 10 years in our careers in the field, and also most recently over the past few years as there's been layoffs and introduction of new technology. So I'd love to kick it off with whoever wants to go first, maybe you, Khalifa, just to give a little bit of your perspective on how you feel the field of people analytics has really changed.
Yeah, I joke now that I have a name for it, right? When you were doing IO in school, it was a lot of data, a lot of structured equation type modeling, but there was no name
Mhm.
for it. And there was evidence that we can do it because the customer side had figured out how to look at their customers and humanize the customer experience and personalize it. So for what I've seen is that people analytics has progressed into being more of a mainstay of businesses. And even when you start seeing startups now looking at people analytics as something as important, that's what I'm seeing. I do think that we're going through a little bit of an identity crisis right now. um, as a field. We're evolving. I think we focused a lot on the analytics as we're a burgeoning field. And now I think we're finally like, yeah, but we also need to focus on the people. So one of the things I'm seeing is a little shift in those are the people who are really delving into people analytics, which includes a lot more IO people and people that background as opposed to people who are just data scientists. So I think we're starting to see some balance in the field, and we're still trying to figure out exactly who we are and what part of the organization we need to be in right now.
I completely
Yeah.
agree.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh no, you go ahead. I'll piggyback off you.
I was going to completely agree as well. I think to Khalifa's point, we were all doing this type of work. It's not new, right? We were all using data in the talent space to help drive decision making. And so we just didn't know what it was called or what people analytics really was or what to even like frame it. And so now I think with data being involved in so much that we do, and when you think about, I think it was Don from Microsoft who called 2020 the twin crises, where you had the kind of racial reckoning, plus you had the pandemic hit. Everyone turned to data to figure out like how do we even begin to process what's going on. We need data to help drive these decisions. And so using data to drive a lot of talent decisions increased significantly during that time frame. And so I think like, not that it wasn't important before, but we saw this huge uptick in like, oh my gosh, we need data, we need data. And I think as we talk about today, all of a sudden people hit this point where like, okay, maybe we have enough. And you started seeing it where people started to get laid off and the analytics team started shrinking. But I do think that the shift has been, yes, we need data to drive change. How much data do we need? How much people do we need to drive that? And kind of how do we figure out what the structure of these teams should be? Because you have data being used in comp and ben, you have it being used in L&D, you have it being used in so many different places. And so is it centralized? Does it sit within these different functions? And so I think that's been the shift of like people don't question that we need it. They just wonder how and when to use it.
Yeah, I think that's, spot on, Stephanie. I'd love to open it up in the chat if you guys who are listening have any thoughts or questions around, um, what have you seen changed in the past few years? What's really surprising to you guys? Because I agree. I think from my perspective, um, being back on the job market, it's so interesting to see the job descriptions for people analytic roles. I think it's a big mix of having a really strong technical background, but also having those consulting skills. And I think it's kind of eye-opening to see just how much can change in a few years when last time I was looking for a job, it wasn't as so clear cut and so technical, which I think it'll shift even more like as AI and as we get into that discussion around the advances in our field, how that will really affect the job descriptions as well.
Yeah, I think there was a heavy focus on research, right? The ability to do research and research with data prior, at least, when I was
Hmm.
on the market. And so there's this ability to do this stuff. But I think now and then technical skills were a plus. If you could do
Yeah.
these things, you're a plus because a lot of people who were in the field of people analytics were data scientists, right? They had already pulled from that pool of people. I think one of the things I've noticed is they recognize the importance of people who understand data and understand the theory, but they want an answer, right? So now they want solutions a lot more than they just want the data. And I think we've killed them with data overload. We've killed leaders with data overload. We've also assumed, I think, the mistake I think a lot of us have made is that we just assume that these leaders are comfortable with data. Many are not. The only difference is they will not tell us that they aren't, right? Because somehow we've taught leaders that it's not a good thing to say that you don't know or you don't understand something. They will just go
Hmm.
off and say, okay, now I'm going to hire somebody else, hire a consultant to tell me this thing in a more practical way. So I think now what I'm seeing in the job market, and I want to caveat that by saying I really need us to work on better job descriptions as a whole. I too have been on the job market over the last 2 years, and it's the most annoying thing in the world. We really need to work on it. But I do put it that it's a little bit of the identity crisis we're going through. But now I think there's more of a balance. We want you to have these skills, and we want you to have some technical skills. We want you to at least be familiar with a dashboard. We want you to be able to build it. The ability to build it is more of a plus than your ability to read it and pull it together. So I think now there's more balance between, we get the theory, we get that you're comfortable with data, but now I want an insight from it. Can you get me there? That's, I think, where we are right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's so interesting, how things have changed and will continue to change over time. Um, I'm not. I'm wondering if we're getting comments. I'm kind of wondering if I haven't. Ooh, I don't know how I did that. Let's turn that off. We're not quite ready for that data, so I'm gonna turn that off. Sneak peek. But I was just checking in. I don't know if we can find access to the comments, but I feel like I'm not getting them streamed in properly. I feel like there's always
And
technical
there's not a
difficulties.
bunch, just people introducing themselves, so we can just keep going.
Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to see if they were coming through, but either way, please drop them wherever you can, and we're happy to answer them in time. But moving on to our next kind of topic of conversation, we kind of wanted to speak more specifically to the layoffs and how they've impacted our space. I think it's you know, personally, it's kind of heartbreaking to see our field experience so many people leave their company so suddenly, and be kind of out on the job market and have so much competitions for roles. So I think it is kind of an interesting time um, to be in this space. And so we'll share some data shortly around people's perspectives, but I just wanted to get kind of Stephanie, Khalifa, your view on and how you feel the layoffs have impacted the people analytics field.
I can tell you how it's impacted me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for
I was like,
it.
I know you
Let's
say a
do
lot
it.
about this topic. Go ahead.
I can tell you how it affected me. So just for background, so within 2022 and 2023, I actually was laid off twice from two different
Wow.
jobs. We're focused on employee experience, and so it's tough, right? The first one being harder than the second one, right? You kind of build your skin. I think one of the biggest things is, if we just look outside of the people analytics space right now, the talent space is being decimated. It's just the entire talent space from end to end, right? In some ways it could feel a little bit scapegoaty, right? Like, this is no longer our last resort. This is our first strategy anytime we get in trouble, and
Mhm.
that's how it can feel. And it's being handled. There's no good way to lay off people, but I can tell you there's multiple bad ways, and we were seeing a lot of multiple bad ways to do it. And I think one of the things people analytics can help you with is understanding the employee experience and understand offboard. And I don't think we place enough emphasis on offboard and how that's related to financial analytics and employee analytics. So I think we're looking at it as a whole, we're not doing well enough with that. In the space of people analytics, I think because it's so not well understood, we often are housed within HR. So we're kind of pooled within HR. That's what we see. And then there's this feeling that it's important, but it's a luxury to have, which is one of the
Mhm.
problems, which is not. It's only when it's gone people realize it wasn't a luxury to have. And then what I'm seeing is companies then, after laying off a lot of analytics people because it felt like a luxury, then they're like, we want the data back. So instead, so you might have had a team of, like, I'm making this up, like 10. Now you bring back one person and ask them to do the job of 10 people. You're not going to get a good people analytics program. You're not going to get the comprehensiveness that you need from it, from doing that. And we're trying to replace it with technology. An interesting thing is, I think the impact of technology on the workforce is a people analytics thing. We do workforce analytics, right? How do we integrate the two things? That's something you actually need people analytics for. Humanizing people analytics does not mean that we're saying you're excluding technology and technological advancements. In fact, it's embracing technology and technological advancements. I think one of the mistakes I hear a lot is that we're just going to replace people. They said that about computers too, but now we're all in front of our computers. It's not going to. If you think about productivity, when technology improves productivity, it is actually in your best interest to increase the amount of people using the technology, because your technology is making your productivity work like tenfold. So your actual output is higher. And so I think we're still in that fear mode. We're still trying to understand who we are. And I think we probably have to do, and sessions like this will do a long way in us understanding people analytics. And the layoffs don't help because it scares people away from HR and the HR space right now. And talent is, analytics and people analytics is in that space. So we have a lot of re-education and establishing the importance of it, even through the layoff, right? Because when you have to build, then you need us back again to help you build. And I would go as far as to say a big reason these layoffs are happening the way they're happening is because you did not invest in a proper people analytics and workforce planning function. That's why you were overhiring. That's why you were making bad financial forecasts. And so now the same people who could help you are paying for it. That's what's happening in
It's
my
funny,
estimation.
yeah. I actually have like a funny anecdote about that because I was talking to a friend of mine who's a software engineer, and he was laid off from another company. And so we were kind of talking about, me being laid off from my company, and I told him about what I was doing, that I do people analytics and make decisions based on data. And he goes, "Oh, so you guys were the one that decided that I should be laid off?" And I was like, I kind of wish that was true, but no, honestly, the people analytics team at your company probably had nothing to do with the decisions around your team being let go. And, you know, while it would be so hard to be in that position to make those decisions and calls, I don't think we're at the table often enough to even say that's true. Um, so anyways, it was an
Yeah,
interesting
well,
exchange.
very, because it's true, right? Like a lot of times, like we provide the data, but the decision making sometimes happens elsewhere, right? And
Yep.
so I think a lot of times, and this comes up in some of our state study data, a lot of times leaders are, though they don't want a bunch of data because then they're held accountable for certain decisions,
Hmm.
right? And this showed up a lot with the hybrid work and kind of remote work stuff, right? We see tons of data that shows that remote work, people are productive, people get their job done. Do a lot of these senior leaders that are making decisions where they're trying to bring people back into an office want to see that data? Probably not, right? And so I think a lot of times people analytics organizations get the sour end of the stick and kind of get layoffs and get cut because there's an accountability piece that comes with seeing the facts and the information that they don't always want to see.
Absolutely. We're the messenger often
Hmm.
getting shot. I mean, that's just the truth. And a good people analytics function is objective. So it's going to tell you you're wrong, right? One of the things about people analytics that sometimes puts us on the outs with some leaders is when you're a good function, you don't back your data into your point of view,
Hmm.
right? I often have seen where, even when I'm consulting, there'll be a leader who says, I want you to tell me this. And I'll say, I'll tell you what the data says, and that often will put us at, and for me, it's like, why are you mad at me? Because I'm telling you what the data says. Like and so I think again, it's often like this push and pull between data and what we provide and that accountability. I think one of the things about people analytics and the lack of understanding of it is it's often treated too often when it's built in companies as a reporting function as opposed to an
Hmm.
insight function. And
Good
if it's a
point.
reporting function, you could twist that data however you'd like because I'm
Yep.
just reporting. But we as analytics, we provide here are some decision support items. Here are some insights. Here are the stories that you're asking us for. And to Stephanie's point, those stories often create accountability. You cannot say what you can't say you don't know because we told you. And so often we're the messenger, I don't want to hear that. And so
Yep.
when a powerful person says they don't want to hear that, guess who's going to get laid off? Where else?
Right, right. Well, and you
It's
also
a
see the same thing happening in some of the DEI spaces, right? Where they had a whole bunch of layoffs in those spaces. And a lot of times people analytics teams, we own the DEI data and we're responsible for those things. And so even like I have friends that got cut from that did the DEI analytics within people analytics. And so it's like people don't even want to go back to those spaces. I had someone tell me the other day, like they're interested in DEI work, but they don't want you to call it that. Like, how can you label my role something different? Because I'm afraid that if you label it DEI, I'm up for on the chopping block for layoffs. Same thing in some of the people analytics spaces. Like people are shying away from sometimes wanting specific roles. And that's why I think when you talk about how has the layoffs changed the field, I think people shy away from like a lot of people are shying away from DEI analytics roles right now because of the layoffs. And so how do we change the narrative and how do we shift some of that around where it's, you know, the value add that we bring is more important than the potential of the layoff.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too that we don't talk about is people analytics is part of a risk management function. We're helping you manage risk, right? A lot of the things that I've seen happening over the years, I could have told you that 5 years ago with the data that I was seeing. I could have told you that 5 years ago that there was no way that that type of hiring is sustainable. And we can tell you how to mitigate risk, right? But you know, when you're not seen that way, when you're not understood to be that way, sometimes we end up in a spot where we're just seen as another arm of HR, where there's nothing wrong with HR, but are we so we live in this weird, we're HR, we're analytics, we're, you know, you find a lot of people analytics people are specialists in HR, and that's also a weird space for HR as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
looking at the comments, I see Bria mentioned that she sees people analytics roles like her own as influences of HR, armed with data, ready to recommend and guide, why the final decision often lies somewhere else. I think that ties perfectly with the point you were making, Khalifa.
Yeah. It's so hard sometimes to be in those spots where you know you have the data, but it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about how you can influence the people. And I kind of like the idea of maybe rebranding a little bit. You know, we do seem to have some kind of say over the titles of our teams in our companies. So maybe we do more of like people analytics and consulting or risk management and people analytics. I don't know, you know, kind of combine some of these things. So when leaders you know, more senior leaders see us, they see the brand that we represent, not just HR. But well, I think we could probably move into some of our data discussion if that's okay with you guys. Yeah. Well, I'll turn on my slides. So just kind of to preface this, and Stephanie, I don't know if you want to jump in
Yeah.
because Stephanie was the mastermind behind this data, but let's see if I can get it turned on
Yeah,
here.
while you're pulling that up, I'll just get some context. So a few months ago, actually this all started last year, just with a lot of layoffs happening. I think I had talked to you, Khalifa, but I had also talked to like 4 or 5 of our other friends that are in our group that had been laid off. And then I was talking to Richard Rosno, and he was mentioning the people that he was getting reached out to that had been laid off. And we just got to a point where like, okay, a lot of us in this space are getting laid off, but we don't understand who we are, where we're getting laid off from. Are we leaving the field when we get laid off? Is it demographically representative of like the field, or are we seeing someone, a certain group being disproportionately laid off? And we just were curious. We're like, okay, let's just find out. And so we launched the people analytics kind of layoff landscape study just to understand like where are people being laid off and how do we feel, and are we optimistic about the future of the field after going through so many of those layoffs in the last couple of years. And so, Rachel, I'll turn it over to you to go through some of the overall findings, and then we can chat through it. But that's just a little bit of the context about why we even started this and where the data kind of stems from. And it was just a LinkedIn survey we posted, got tons of responses, over 100. And so the data all reflects some of the responses we got.
Yeah. No, I was super happy to get involved with this study because I think it's, you know, a really good way to kind of process what we're all going through. Um, so just in general, we have some of the highlights of our findings. We'll dig into a few pieces in the next few slides, but in general, we thought it was really great to see 80% of respondents felt optimistic about the future of people analytics. So while we are still kind of going through some changes, you know, they feel it'll be around for a while. 63% of respondents felt confident about the stability of their job. So not super high, but still relatively confident and hopeful about their specific job. We did find that 28% of our respondents had been laid off in the past 2 years. So that's kind of a piece of data that we'll look through. And then finally, one interesting piece is, you know, we asked, did companies provide enough support to employees who had been laid off, and only 12% agreed with that. So love to get your thoughts and comments in the chat if you have any, but that's kind of our overall findings. And anything you guys want to comment on, or you want me to jump to the next slide?
Khalifa, curious. I know this is probably one of your first time seeing it, the data. Any initial thoughts? I kind of like the 12% of people leaving that companies did enough to support being laid off. I thought that one kind of caught my eye, that people are like, you're laying us off, but not doing anything to support us.
It is, right? And in many cases, and not only from my own experience, just so many other people's experience. I remember one time I just felt like LinkedIn was a sea of sorrows, and it's coming back up right now, where again, it's just depressing to get on there. I honestly believe that I'm not surprised by the 12%, especially if these are people who were laid off. In that moment, it never feels good. It never feels like there's enough support. The lead up is not well, it's not being handled well. And we've seen a lot of companies just doing the worst possible form of layoff. Um, I'm a little surprised by the confidence about the stability of the job. I really thought I would be lower. I really, really thought I would be lower because there's so many people who, it just at least from anecdotal evidence, just feel like they're seeing now they could get laid off at any time, and you could have done really good work. And an example, and I'll use a personal example because I don't want to talk about anybody else, but I had just been in one of my layoffs, I had just been promoted like 4 months before. And it's like, what? Right? And sometimes it's very difficult to understand that it's not you or anything you did. Right? You're literally a number at that point, and you're in a function that is at that moment feels dispensable. Right? You're not um, income generative at that moment. I am surprised but happy at how many people are optimistic about the future of people analytics. I think because it's a burgeoning field, it's a growing field, there's so much we could do. And there's a part of me that hopes that because of how badly these layoffs have been handled, that's what's giving us optimism, because we're like, okay, clearly there's work to do.
And it can't get much worse. Like, hopefully it won't get much
worse. Right. Between that, and I think there's so much innovation now. AI technologies are not new, but they're growing fast. They're marketing better. I think now I'm seeing more XM platforms, more EX platforms. So I too am very optimistic about the future of the field as well, even though the job landscape is not great. Not great right now.
Well, great. Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like, I've looked at this data quite a bit, and I think it is pretty reflective of my situation and, my personal outlook. So we'll jump to the next slide. Hopefully. Okay. There's like a little button and it won't
I
go
did it.
forward.
It switched then.
Okay. So now we're on the second
You
slide.
have to do it in the restream. I just clicked it. We're on the layoff landscape slide.
Okay, great. I think it's just slow.
Wait, skipped another one. There you go.
Okay, you guys control it because I think my computer is delayed. So if y'all get it to 2, we can talk through it. So yeah, well, I kind of wanted to just put together a visual of where respondents who had been laid off were coming from. We see that they were primarily laid off from technology and information services industries, which makes sense given kind of who is primarily using people analytics at the moment. Again, mostly people analytics individuals who are laid off, and that was the primary sample of the survey, but we did see some layoffs in terms of employee experience and talent acquisition, those kind of analytic fields as well. And then it was primarily senior leadership or senior IC positions who responded to the survey and reported that they were being laid off. So, more of those senior level roles. So, Khalifa, Stephanie, to you guys' points, it is kind of just being in the less attractive role at the time. And then, but nicely, we did see that 57% had found a new role, since they'd been laid off, and 43% were still looking. So I think that's good news. It's better than being less than half. But one finding I thought I pulled out was that 67% of those who had found a new role, who'd been laid off and found a new role, they changed industries. And so that means that they were moving away from technology, tech companies and computer based companies, and kind of moving into other industries, which I thought was really interesting, and should maybe have an impact on our field over time. Any thoughts on kind of this breakout of who were laid off and where they came from?
For me, not surprised on my end. I am also not surprised about people moving away from tech right now. I
Mm-hmm.
think the sheer volume of tech, and I think for me, I see we have a comment saying survive of a tech layoff here. I'm with you. I'm with you. I think one of the things that happened with tech is the EVP of tech, the employer value proposition of tech was high. I mean, high. And so when you see what had happened, it felt jarring to a lot of people. I think it was reported on more, it made more news. A lot of tech leaders are they're out there, they're influencers. So I think it's reported on more because it felt like everybody was being pushed to tech at one point, and then to see tech, what happened in tech, I could see why people are moving away from tech. Something that I've again, it's probably more anecdotal, is also moving away from larger companies to smaller companies. That's what I've seen a lot of our people in our field doing. I've seen a lot more smaller to medium-sized companies start smaller people analytics groups. And the other thing I'm seeing is a lot of people, including myself, focus a lot on their own consulting practices as well. Because it's hard. Like it's hard to make the impact often when you feel like your hands are tied, but sometimes when you're on your own, you have the ability to fire clients. And you have the ability to go in and have the impact that you're trying to make. So none of this is surprising to me at all, but I thought I'd see a little bit more of what people did. It's a strange economy, honestly. So
I think that's a really good point. Erica in the comments mentioned like she completely agrees with everything you're saying, and also said that that's probably what ties to the confidence, right? People left tech and went to a different industry or started their own thing, and that's probably why they have more confidence in the stability of their current jobs because they're outside of the tech industry more so.
Definitely.
Another
I love.
interesting point that I thought was fascinating was the senior leadership, and I guess totally makes sense, right, in terms of higher paying roles, and then having people that know how to do the jobs underneath them, and so getting rid of some of those mid-level manager type folks and just letting the people beneath them do the work. And so I thought that was something that we see not just in people analytics, but we've seen across many other organizations in different industries where layoffs have tend to be in that senior management place because you get they cost the most, plus you have people underneath them that probably can do the work with sometimes without their guidance. So I thought that was interesting to see, or validation, I guess, to see in the work.
I mean,
Yeah.
something that's a little jarring on the slide for me, 43% still looking at the time. It's a big number. That's a big number of people, you know. Um, it is taking much longer to find jobs right now. The competition is fierce right now. The wages are suppressed right now, and that is tough. That's a lot of people, a lot of families. I see that, and that's a very tough statistic to look at.
Yes.
Really good point. And I think that ties to what Rachel was mentioning earlier when she was introducing herself, right? Like, I mean, I know I spent 6 months trying to even find a role, right? Diving into figuring out where it is. Like, the market is just not what it was a couple of years ago for a lot of our spaces.
Yep. And it's so true. I think the competition is very fierce, and it's hard because it's such a small and we're such a close knit community. I feel like we all, support each other and have such great relationships and do things like this, have meetups. And so to know that, there's other people out there that are just as eager to get a job, it's very tricky to kind of be on the job market right now when there's so many other qualified folks, wanting to get the job that
Absolutely.
doesn't pay as well as your previous job. And so,
Right.
you
And
know,
right, right. I mean, think about students coming out right now, right?
Yeah,
companies
I feel for
companies are
them.
trying, they're coming out there without the same opportunities, and they're competing against people with multiple years of experience and who have no choice at this point. You've almost been beaten down into taking a lower paying job. I mean, that's just the truth because the market is just not competitive. And in 2024 alone, we're probably, I think the estimated amount of layoffs, and we're not even in April, but the estimated amount of layoffs for Q1 is about 35,000 people. Consider that almost half of those people are still looking for jobs, and many of those were looking for jobs since last year. That is that is hard. It is hard.
I think we're gonna have to repeat the survey again, Stephanie. We'll have to do like a phase two, see what's going
We'll,
on at the
we'll
end.
have to enlist some people to help us next
For
time.
real.
The other data
But
point
no.
that's not on this slide that we did see was that 7% of people left the field they were in. So whatever people analytics type field they were in was the majority. They left the field altogether and went to probably more adjacent fields or different places and spaces too. So just thinking through, like, we're losing people from people analytics in general just because of the layoff
Mhm,
landscape.
Anecdotally, I heard a lot of people moving over to the customer experience space, and I get it. I
Yep.
get
Same.
it. I
Same.
understand why.
Similar concept, but probably more funding
More
towards those
stable.
spaces.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I see we have a question here. It says, what recommendations would you have for individuals trying to start anew in the people analytics space during this time of uncertainty within the field?
That is a great question.
I wish I had a very good answer for that.
I was like, Khalifa, the knowledge drop, go.
Oh, I wish I had a good answer for that. I know that the typical answers people are going to tell you is to learn new things and keep sharp, and those are all very typical things to tell you. So I don't think there's new information that I can give you. People analytics is just, it's growing, it's changing, it's shifting, it's transforming, and it's really trying to find its own legs and identity. And I think at this point, it's just staying connected. And I know that's a terrible answer, but staying connected in the community is extremely helpful. From a layoff perspective, I can tell you the only reason I was able to make it out of a layoff haze was staying connected to the community. It's extremely helpful. We do look out for each other, but you got to make yourself kind of, you got to put yourself into the community, I think.
Yeah, I would agree, Khalifa. I think I saw a post on LinkedIn earlier that was saying kind of the same thing. Like, it's don't be afraid to reach out to people analytics leaders and people you respect and would love to know more about if you're new in the field, and just have a conversation, no strings attached, so that you can stay connected to what certain organizations are doing, unexpected things that you might not have thought about. Just have some more of those conversations so that you can learn and make those connections, because they will pay off in the long run.
Definitely will. There's another question here, I think based on that. It's, how do you feel this current market compares to that of 2008 to 2009? So I assume that was during
The recession.
The
the
recession.
housing market crisis, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, I was in school. I don't know.
I was about to say I wasn't here yet.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because yeah, I actually will
That's a good.
probably see why on the next slide if we want to go to the next slide.
I also
Because
would
we,
be curious
yeah,
whoever answered that question, if they have perspectives too, because again, just not being in the field yet, I'm actually now very curious how that shifted and changes. So anyone that's on the call or in the chat would love to get feedback on that, because I really wonder, is it different? And because it was people
Right.
analytics wasn't a formalized kind of thing and it was spread out everywhere, my assumption is it was, right? It wasn't like a function where you can go take away the folks as much as it is now. It was more so spread and you didn't really know where the people sat, and they were in different places and probably had different titles where you couldn't really pinpoint them. So my assumption is that it was very different.
Yeah, that's my feeling too. And again, just speaking from more of what's in my head as to any data in front of me. So just want to give that caveat. The difference might just be industry. And I think because there was a little bit of an out that a lot of leaders got post-COVID, where so many people were remote, the layoff process probably was different. It didn't feel like these mass layoffs. The communication wasn't as prevalent and in your face, and it wasn't being done with this. It probably, again, no good way to lay off people, but I think it was hard. And I don't know that I don't want to compare that pain between these two things. I think it was hard in both ways, but people analytics, I think, wasn't there enough. And in some ways, you might argue that people analytics probably was born as a
Mhm.
function, as a function because of things like that. We need more data. There was more regulatory stuff that came out of it. There was more forecasting that people needed, because that was a brutal time. But being in I don't know that the field was as prevalent, and then I don't know that the talent industry as a whole was as devastated as it is right in this moment.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Makes sense. Looks like in the chat there is consensus that 08, 09 was worse, way more brutal than it is
It
now.
was a good time to be in school, I'll tell you that. It
Yeah,
definitely was a good
agreed.
time to be in school.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to continue our kind of discussion of the data so we don't run out of time and we still have a little bit of time at the end. So, this is just a little bit of a comparison between respondents who had been laid off um, based on the survey as compared to those who reported not being laid off. And not a, I feel like overall there is pretty high agreement, but I do think there's interesting differences in some of these. So, kind of going along with our earlier conversation about companies providing enough support. What's interesting in this chart is that while support was low, employees who had been laid off, like personally, did report that they had higher support, whereas those who had not been laid off, felt like there was no support. So I think it was kind of going back to this LinkedIn, like the scrolling of sorrow that you see all these people, suffering. And so you kind of feel that the companies didn't do enough. They did virtually nothing compared to those who were laid off, felt, maybe a tiny bit more okay with the package they got or the position they're in now. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that data point. And then some of the other ones are a little interesting too, just in terms of feeling frustrated, company cultures are suffering, being higher for folks who are laid off versus not. So some data points to discuss.
There's a there's a little bit of relief, I think, when you're in a it's hard regardless, but once it would be interesting to see what part of the layoff cycle they were in. And I
Hmm.
know, like, if you're in a layoff cycle and you're working with the metaphorical gun to your back all the time, sometimes the layoff is a relief.
Hmm.
um, because you can't keep working under that pressure, under that stress. You can't sleep. Every meeting is giving you that. So it's very possible that's part of it. As somebody who had to unfortunately participate in the layoff process, I've also seen where a lot of companies do not care for those who stay, right? We call them survivors. We do not care for those who stay. So for them, they're seeing these people getting out, but what's being left, right, is like a tornado just went through the company. They've lost friends, they've lost coworkers, they've lost help, they've lost resources, they've lost information, they've lost a lot, and they're also grappling with whether they're next, and they're also grappling with this image of the company they used to have, right? And I saw that a lot in tech. When you have these conversations with people in tech, there's this image that they used to have where they'd say, we're family. Is that how we treat our family? And what you see is a lot of that. I think we don't talk about the trauma that comes. I'm big on, let's talk about the trauma of a layoff, but let's talk about the trauma of what is happening in the job market right now in
Hmm.
companies. And I think everybody is scarred. We don't necessarily have to do, there's no Olympics for this. We don't need to have extra points for execution and the amount of trauma you have. But I think we have to come back to the point where we balance people and data to make better decisions. We have to do better.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think that shows even in this data point of even people that weren't laid off, to your point on survivors, 75% of people that weren't laid off still feel like company cultures are suffering due to the surge in layoffs. And even
Mhm.
with the companies are doing enough and do not understand, there's still like high percentage of people that were not laid off that still feel like layoffs have a negative impact on the company as a whole.
Yep. Okay, well, let's jump to the next slide. I think this is, we're going to talk a little bit about the demographics of our survey. So we can kind of, because it was nice, we did a survey of, all people analytics, whether you're laid off or not. And so we're able to get a sense of who identifies in the people analytics field and the employee listening and analytics field. So you can see here that the majority of our respondents were millennials, 70%. We did have close to 21% Gen X, but I don't think this is surprising to us. I think we all identify that way, but it is kind of an interesting data point to see kind of who is represented in this data. You can also see in terms of race and ethnicity that half of the respondents, 50%, identified as white. Then we have about 17% Black, 17% Asian, and then 17% Hispanic, Middle Eastern, or two or more races. And then what I thought was interesting in terms of gender, we had close to 60% female and 42% male respondents to this survey. So just kind of an interesting view on the demographics of people analytics. So I'd love any thoughts from you guys on whether this is surprising, this kind of see how you see the field. And, I think Stephanie, if you have any data you want to share around from our study as well, we just kind of wanted to speak around these topics.
Yeah, I think my initial thought is I wonder how much of these demographics are biased by the fact that I posted the study and it was my friends list.
And it's on LinkedIn. Yes, I thought about that too as well. If we were really going to do a true scientific study, probably could have done
Right.
a little bit more. But this was, I think, a great first start just to get the conversation
Fair,
started.
right, and it was reposted in several different places and spaces, so I do think, like, it did get a lot of representation, but, like, when I see 57% female, I don't think that's representative of the people analytics field itself. I think it might
Mhm.
be that might be where my friends list comes into play a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause that's a pretty diverse group too, as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
So this is
yeah.
this is Stephanie's plug for, if there's a university or student that would
Right.
like that would like to do a joint study with Stephanie and team.
So when we do
We'll
this
do
again
part
the
two.
next time, we can make sure we get a little bit more representation. But I think our original hypothesis was that minorities were being laid off at a higher rate or disproportionate percentage than white. That wasn't found in the study. I will say that. And then Rachel and I have only done preliminary findings. We haven't deep dive into the stats. That wasn't found. We did find that I think white people were being, I think, 35% compared to 26% Black, and I think it was 27% Asian. So we did see the white population being laid off more than the minorities. We did see women being laid off more than men. So that was, I think, data point. I think it was like 33% female and like 26% men. Men were laid off. So that is a difference where women were more likely so far, based on our preliminary findings, to be laid off than men. Generations, Gen X, we did see to be more likely to be laid off than millennials.
Which would make sense because of kind of the level, like, senior leader, they're probably more likely to be tenured in an organization. And so I think that makes sense as well.
Mhm.
That's a great question, Erica. I wonder what the demographic breakdown of LinkedIn looks like too. Because yeah, I do think people who are on LinkedIn are definitely, more likely, I think, to be a lot like the millennial age. I could be wrong, but it is an interesting question.
I think there's an interesting comment too in the chat by Leonidas. I hope I did not mispronounce your name. Um, It says, I believe that work from home forced a frantic curiosity about employees because they were not physically around each other. Now that a lot of companies are returning to office, is that effect reducing? And in turn, is that reducing the need or justification for people analytics resources? Um, my take on that is it was never a function. It should never, let me say, it should never have been a function of location. And there's so many global companies. The interesting thing about return to office that is so absurd to me is the amount of people that I see return to office and spend all day on Zoom or on video calls or on phone calls, right? Because a lot of their clients, a lot of their peers, a lot of their teams, your global companies, people are not co-located in the same place. But that's a whole other session about return to office. Um, I think right now companies could find any excuse they'd like to reduce people analytics if they needed to. Return to office actually would require more people analytics functions, especially if you're looking at things like bad swipe data, login data, traffic in buildings, real estate usage. All of those things are elements of people analytics. And to your point, it could be because there's a lack of understanding about people analytics. I do think it was COVID that was the one that I think that was the impetus for a lot of people to push CHROs to the forefront to help them make decisions as opposed to being transactional. They were being asked to be transformational at that moment. And I think the data was there, but I think there was a need for faster decisions. And so before, if you've worked with HR, people analytics, you can know how long a decision could take. During COVID, these decisions were being made almost in real time. And I think the value proposition of people analytics was just more pronounced then. Now I don't think that it's not that people analytics is not being viewed as important. It's just the speed of decisions have slowed down again, I think.
Mhm. Well, let's hop to the next slide, and it's on the future. So that's exciting. And then we can wrap up with questions, final comments. See if I can get it to go to the next slide.
It's there.
Okay, cool. It's not there for me, but again, I wanted to kind of highlight that again, we are seeing so much optimism in our field. I think it's kind of the nature of who people analytics people tend to be, just, very excited about data, very excited about what we can do with data and the impact we can make. That's at least how I feel. But then we did ask sorry, the percentages are a little wonky in this, but we did ask our respondents how they felt the work of people analytics would change or kind of evolve in the next year into 2024. And we saw that actually 61% felt that it would continue to expand in organization. So even though we had seen kind of a consolidation, layoffs. The majority still feel like it's expanding in organizations overall. 21% thought people analytics, the people and people analytics would move to consulting firms, and 15% thought it would move to tech vendors, which I think is, a good point because there are so many tech vendors in the space. We spoke to several last week. So there's a lot of great resources around technology and people analytics. So how is that going to impact the landscape? And then finally, we asked about AI because I think that is such a hot topic these days. And then we did see that 45% of our respondents felt that the field would be impacted by AI and technological advances in the next year. So kind of something that to go back to the point, like what could we be doing to continue to kind of show the value is stay on top of the AI wave and see how that's being asked about in organizations or how it's being implemented in certain vendors that you're using. But thoughts, Khalifa, Stephanie, on the future?
I just love that we're optimistic.
Mm-hmm. We gotta
I love
be.
how optimistic we are. I love how optimistic and resilient we are in people analytics, and it's a space where you can become extremely cynical. So
Mhm.
I love that. I'm not very surprised. I do think it's going to expand more. I do think consulting firms are, it's a little because it's a little bit of a catchy thing right now. That's it's again as we I'm going back to we're still trying to find our feet and our identity. So is it a consultant function? Is it an internal or external consultant function? Is it something you need to buy? Is it something you need to build? I think we're still finding our way, and so I'm not that surprised. I'm almost my lean is that that number for going to consultant firms is probably going to be bigger, only because so many people are leaving and starting their own now as
Mhm.
individual consultants. So probably not large consulting firms, but like maybe many smaller consulting firms. But I love it. 45% is a little bit lower than I thought it would be in terms of how it will be affected and impacted by AI and technological advances. My opinion is it's probably going to be much higher um,
And this was the
right now
average.
because
We let people kind of write in, like, what percent.
right,
So I think it
right,
spanned, from 100% to, yeah,
right.
0%. So I
But
think,
no,
yeah, it
but
kinda depends on your take.
yeah, but I mean, I love the optimism. I say let's keep the optimism. Life is hard enough as it is. We don't have to add to it.
Right. Yeah, I also was thinking the move to tech vendors and the consulting firms will be a little bit higher. I just think because to your point, Khalifa, some people are starting their own thing, but also so many people analytics tech companies are starting to pop up. I thought there'd be a little bit more in those spaces. But I like that people think that it's going to expand more in organizations. I think because data is so sensitive and people want to keep it in their internal kind of buckets, which makes sense. So I can see why it's the highest. I just expected the other ones to be a little bit higher. Also, totally was shocked by the 45% because impacted is different than saying replace, right? Like I was like impacted
Right.
by, I think a lot of it would be impacted by, not necessarily replaced all the way though.
I think
Agreed.
it's just like an interesting conversation around where people are on that kind of continuum of, we're fully investing in these models and these AI, um, you know, resources, whereas other companies are still very much trying to get their data straight and get their people analytics groups off the ground. So I think it kind of just depends on where the team or the person is at their organization. But
Yeah.
well,
Interesting
this
thing
was
that I've seen.
Erica said, oh, go ahead, Khalifa.
Not just an interesting trend that I've seen is a lot of companies bringing in the AI, but not the people analytics yet. So that should be fun. So job security for the consulting firms.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I was
that'll be
just
really
looking at the
interesting.
comments, and Erica mentioned to get people analytics out from under HR was her suggestion.
It's a
Like more
debate.
focus on the
It's a debate.
business incomes, but business outcomes, right?
Well, yeah, well, I think just to wrap up, we have about 2 minutes left. So I wanted to kind of see if there were any closing thoughts from you, Khalifa, Stephanie. I think we also thought, um, we could share kind of our recommendations, like what we would give advice on in terms of the current landscape. And I know just for me personally, I think it is about making the connections, staying involved in the community. Like, I don't know what I would do without Stephanie right now. I think it's so important to kind of have that person that you can go to and say, yeah, this was a really hard day in terms of job searching, or this was a great week. I'm so excited about the things that are out there, because I think that is generally what we feel. So that's my recommendation, is know that you're not alone, that there's data that shows you're not alone, and ultimately we'll find a spot for us all. Any other thoughts, Khalifa,
Agree.
Stephanie?
I have the same feeling, and I thank you all for having these kind of discussions because I think sometimes we don't see the quiet things out loud enough. I think there was somebody, I think it was Joseph, who said earlier, like, I have these thoughts, so we should have these conversations. So, and I know, Stephanie, you and I, we've had some of these conversations, a lot too. So I think we just need to talk about it a lot more. So I thank you all for having this conversation uh,
No,
for
thank
sure.
you.
Yeah. For sure. Thanks for joining, and thanks everyone for joining and listening in. I totally agree. It's been a great conversation. Did throw up the future events coming up in the next couple of Fridays, so please continue to join the series.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.